Hey there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike. My name is Superfly Comics Guy, bringing you another omnibus review today. Have you watched Daredevil Born Again? Are you a fan of the show? Maybe you can't wait for the next season? Well then stick around, because today we're taking a look at the Daredevil by Charles Soule Omnibus, the run that inspired a lot of the material in that show. So we'll be taking a look at the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and we'll be doing a flip through where I can share my own thoughts, opinions, and recommendations on the book. So if you like the video at any point, you know how to show it, and feel free to leave those comments down below. But with that out of the way, let's dive right in. Starting off with the dust jacket, I have here the direct market cover to this omnibus, a very striking cover, might I add, with this intense red. We got Daredevil in this new black suit. We got this new character here. We got this weird skeletal hand with 10 fingers on it. What could that all mean? I don't know. We'll dive into that later. There is, of course, also a standard cover available featuring some stunning Phil Noto artwork, I believe. Honestly, I quite like the standard cover too, but this one caught my eye more when I first saw it. Speaking of what might catch your eye is the spine here, so there's a look at that. It pops quite nicely with this white design, and on the back that's continued as well. We have a white design here, Daredevil in the black suit, pretty awesome artwork there. This run collects, or this omnibus collects, the Daredevil 2015 series 1 through 28 and 595 through to 612. So they did some funky things with the numbering there. Daredevil Annual 2016, the Daredevil Punisher 7th Circle 1 through 4, and material from All New, All Different .1, number 1. This book has a cover price of $125 US and $157 Canadian. Let's flip it over, take a look under the dust jacket. There we are. So there you go. You have the standard cover on the front board of the book. There is the spine, so this changes things up. You have the black spine on the inside, whereas you have the white spine on the dust jacket. And the back, you have the direct market cover for the dust jacket. So regardless of which dust jacket cover you choose, you have both covers on the inside anyway, on the board of the book. But with that, let's start taking a look through the contents. Okay, so let's dive right in. We got some red bookend pages here, very striking. That's a cool image. That kind of reminds me of Alex Maleev's artwork, the way he would draw Daredevil. We have a credits page here, not a table of contents, but it's showing you all the arcs in here and the artists responsible. And then we just dive right in. Now, normally I'd save the art for the end, but I kind of want to dive into the art style here in the beginning first, because we have a very, very interesting art style. There's very few colors used on these pages in the beginning, so I think it gives it a pretty unique look, very striking. You can see, speaking of unique, you have Daredevil in this new black suit. Oh, so cool. You may have noticed on the credits page actually that there are a lot of different artists credited, and yes, the art does change somewhat often in this book, and sometimes that can feel a little jarring to me or distracting, but I never had that happen here. Now again, more examples of very few colors. This one is more reddish and beige. You can kind of flip through and get a sense for that. Like this is more brown. So quite an interesting use of colors early on here. But anyway, let's talk about this run, Charles Soule's run on Daredevil. And once again, as with all my videos, I'm going to do my best to keep spoilers to an absolute minimum so that if you choose to pick this book up, you can still enjoy the story. But Charles Soule's run does quite a few interesting things. Now, for instance, you may notice there's a new character here, the same one we saw on that dust jacket that I talked about, because this run is where we get our introduction to Blind Spot. Now, Blind Spot, or Sam, as he goes by, is actually an illegal immigrant who is just trying to make ends meet, but he's very, very smart. He invents this invisibility suit, and all he really wants to do is help people. But he's got that sort of young, brash, chaotic energy to him, so he needs someone to train him, someone to point him in the right direction. And actually, that someone ends up being Daredevil, which is pretty interesting because we don't usually get to see Daredevil with a sidekick. He likes to work alone, usually. Now, I say sidekick, but I felt that the book did a good job of fleshing out Blind Spot as a character, giving him meaningful things to do and making him an interesting character. But anyway, back to other interesting things about this run. So if you've read the runs leading up to this, you may know that at some point the world found out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. But when you start reading this book, you'll notice that the world has forgotten that fact. Only Matt's friend, Foggy Nelson, still knows. But they're on very, very rough terms. Foggy resents Matt, and we're clearly led to believe that Matt did something to reverse this big secret. We just don't know what that is. So there's this mystery going on, and that progressively gets revealed as the story goes on. Now, it gets a little silly at times because even though the world has seemingly forgotten that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, Daredevil will constantly name drop Matt Murdock and vice versa, or Matt will, flaunt his wealth of knowledge surrounding superhero affairs. So it's a little silly that they reverse this, but then Matt is just being so careless about it. It's like, do you want the world to find out again that you're Daredevil? But in general, this run is a return to darker roots following Mark Waid's run. Mark Waid's run was more lighthearted and a little swashbuckly. This brings back the darkness. It brings back that sort of hard-boiled crime drama. Matt's at a pretty dark time. He's struggling with his faith. So it's more similar to something like the Bendis run or the Brubaker run. But there's some interesting changes. It's not just retreading old ground. Matt is in the DA's office now as a prosecutor. He's working for Ben Hochberg, and the dynamic there feels a little bit like Peter Parker working for Jonah Jameson at the Daily Bugle. That was quite interesting, and the lawyer stuff is quite fun because, if I'm not mistaken, Charles Soule used to be a lawyer. So that gives everything an air of believability when you have the writer who is experienced in these sort of things and the terminology. It makes it more engaging, in my opinion. But to give you a feel of some of the stories you might get in here, we have here a new crime lord in town known as Ten Fingers, which explains the skeletal hand we saw in the dust jacket with 10 fingers on it. And he runs this gang of illegal immigrants that he protects from deportation, but in return, he asks for their loyalty and service to him. So you can imagine how that kind of creates an interesting conflict with Blind Spot, who I mentioned, and his motives. But, as always, in the world of crime, there are going to be certain organizations that aren't going to take too kindly to a new faction like this showing up and throwing their weight around. So, a little bit of a gang war can kick up, and you can imagine who shows up. We'll get plenty of cameos from other characters in this run, so Elektra will return, and she confronts Daredevil very upset. She thinks he's taken something away from her, but ultimately she needs his help. And I love watching those two together. Their dynamic is always fascinating, the way they interact. There will be team-ups with Spider-Man and Daredevil. They have an adventure in Macau, China. And it's always fun when Spider-Man teams up with Daredevil because Spider-Man brings out that sort of more fun, quippy side of Daredevil. And you have team-ups with Daredevil and Echo. The Gladiator returns. You have Daredevil and Punisher. So there's that classic trope of Daredevil apprehends a criminal, wants to send him to trial. Meanwhile, Punisher wants to kill that same criminal. And they have their classic debate. Is it a little played out? Yes, but it's still pretty fun to watch Daredevil and Punisher go at it. You have one of the more notable arcs in this run is called Dark Art, where Blindspot stumbles upon a mural painted with blood, and that's where we get our introduction to Muse, who you may recognize from the recently released Born Again show. And in comparison, Muse is handled actually much better here than he was in the show, at least in my opinion. Here, he's quite like unsettling and scary. He's like this sociopath, and he does some really messed up stuff. Like, this is the type of guy who will just willingly break his own bones and not react to it. It's quite creepy. In the show, they kind of change his origin up quite a bit, and it didn't really feel like the exact same character to me. I don't know, maybe Muse is used at some point later on, like maybe in Zdarsky's run, which I haven't read, I'm not aware of, so maybe the show was drawing on some of that, but in general I found Muse to be more interesting here. But anyway, that whole story arc kind of centers around Inhumans who are being targeted and murdered. Daredevil has to team up with what's it called? The New Adelan Security Service to investigate these murders. I don't know. Typically, I don't really care for the Inhumans as characters. I don't find them that interesting. But they weren't too bad here. Speaking of Born Again, though, what did you guys think if you've seen the show? Overall, I would say I enjoyed it, and I am super happy that we have Daredevil back in his own show with so many of the previous actors reprising their roles from the Netflix seasons. Now, I don't think it was as strong as the Netflix seasons overall. The pacing wasn't always there, the episodes weren't as cohesive, and I was a little let down by the ending, I would say, because it felt like that final episode was like just a whole bunch of build-up for a pretty unsatisfying conclusion. I get that they want to continue the story, but I was hoping for some more finality there, especially similar to how the Netflix seasons handled their season finales. And yes, I know about the show was rewrites and production turmoil that it went through, but still, at the end of the day, you got to evaluate the finished product, right? Similarly, this run has its own share of stumbles. For example, if you enjoyed Mark Waid's run, you'll be disappointed to know that Kirsten McDuffie, a character from that run, was basically completely written off, which is unfortunate, because she was a pretty interesting character. She balanced Matt out. I found that she challenged him intellectually. So it's kind of sad to see, a character set up in one person's run and then discarded when the next person starts their run. You'll get the introduction of a character known as Father Jordan. So I mentioned that Matt was struggling with his faith, and Father Jordan is like this priest that he meets, and he imparts some interesting words of wisdom to Matt. He says, "God made the world imperfect, but made us capable of seeing a better world and wanting it." And that comes to Matt at a particularly interesting point in time. We don't really know much about Father Jordan at first, but he's pretty mysterious. But once you start finding out more and more about him, it gets pretty far-fetched. And I overall thought he was a bit of a strange character in this run. Not bad necessarily, but maybe not as fleshed out as he could have been. But back to the things that this run does really well. Like I mentioned, Charles Soule does some really interesting stuff with the lawyer side of Matt and the legal drama stuff. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, for example, one of the things that Matt tries to do at one point is see if he's able to testify as Daredevil, but without revealing his identity. Because if he's able to accomplish that and set a legal precedent for other heroes to be able to do that, think of like the amount of convictions and criminals you could put away simply based on the testimony of these heroes who are going up against said criminals. So it would really be something. I'm not going to tell you if he succeeds or not, but that would be definitely a useful legal precedent to have, especially considering one of the biggest arcs and plot points in this run. Mayor Fisk, that's right, the Kingpin himself became mayor while Matt was gone in San Francisco during Mark Waid's run. And one of the first things Fisk does is he outlaws vigilantes completely, which leaves Daredevil as public enemy number one, pretty much. And there's quite a few people who want to cash in on that reward. Meanwhile, Matt Murdock will try to work against Fisk and undermine this throne he sits on. And actually, something goofy that happens during this time is we have the return of Mike Murdock, which is a bit of a niche character or alter ego. Fun fact, if you don't know, Mike Murdock was basically, in the early days, we're talking like 60s Daredevil, 1960s, Mike Murdock was an alter ego that Matt came up with to explain why Matt Murdock wasn't Daredevil. Basically, he needed like an alibi, so he invented this alter ego, Mike Murdock, and Charles Soule kind of brings that back here. It's goofy, but it's oddly entertaining. But anyway, going back to the writing, there is some really, really good writing for Daredevil in here. You can tell that Charles Soule is a big fan of the character and understands him pretty well. Like, one of my favorite quotes that comes from Daredevil in this book is, "I cannot see the light, so I must be the light." Or another awesome quote in here, "I made a promise once. I will fight. I will always fight for a perfect world. But the fight is not for me. I will never see that perfect world. I fight for everyone else, for everyone who can't." And I just think that that's a really good, quick summary of Daredevil's character. This guy is put through the ringer. He doesn't have the best of lives, and he doesn't take the best care of himself, but he keeps pushing because he's just trying to make the world a better place for other people. He's very, well, he has selfish moments, but he's ultimately a very selfless character. And this leads into one of my favorite arcs in the whole book, which is actually called Death of Daredevil. Whether that's a symbolic death or even a literal death, I'm not going to spoil that. I will leave that up to your reading. But this arc at the very end of the book just further delves into Daredevil's psyche and what makes him tick, because each issue in that arc is themed around a phobia. So you have thanatophobia, which is the fear of death. You have pistanthrophobia, which is the fear of trusting people. You have phobophobia, which is, funnily enough, a fear of phobias. And you have apeirophobia, which is the fear of infinity. And all these little phobias kind of reveal an aspect of Daredevil's character. And again, I'm doing my best to dance around spoilers, but one of the strongest points of this run is the way it ends. At least I thought anyway. And at the end of the book is where you will get some excellent Phil Noto artwork. But again, also the colorist really deserves to be praised for those like streaky, watercolory type effects. But I don't want to reveal too much, so let's dive into the extras section, which is pretty short, censoring that page on the left there. But first of all, we have an afterword from a bunch of the creators, Charles Soule, Ron Garney, Phil Noto, Clayton Cowles, going into their thoughts about the run and the character. You have this fun little How to Draw Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky. He's done quite a few of these how to draw insert character here variants, which I find pretty entertaining. And speaking of variants, that's what the remainder of the extra section is various variant covers. So we don't have to go into all of them, but we can take a look at a few. Alex Ross, Joe Quesada there. Oh, Adi Granov. Pretty fantastic stuff. A remastered variant by Jack Kirby. original Daredevil. And then this is really cool, the TV variant based on the Netflix show by Paulo Oliveira. But pretty short extra section overall. Okay, the build quality. Now, I'd say this is where I'm going to tear this book apart, but it seems like it kind of wants to do that for me. Yeah, terrible binding on this book. I thought it was okay back when I unboxed it in my haul video way back when, but this is shameful. Here, let me get a different angle for you. If I raise it up like this, yeah, take a look at that. This book was coming undone while I was reading it, which is never a good sign. This is definitely going to require repairs. This is unacceptable for an omnibus of this size and at this price point. It has 1,216 pages, and I will say it doesn't feel that long. This book, like, I flew by it. It was very fun to read, but the build quality is just terrible on this printing. I believe I have the first printing here. The gutter loss at times can be quite apparent. It's not so bad in the middle here, but that's just because the binding is coming apart. But towards the beginning, I noticed that some of the spread pages were getting obscured by the gutter loss. In general, I don't really like how these pages feel. A lot of them had this sort of printer ink residue on them. It just didn't feel very high quality. It didn't really feel like they were paying attention to it when they were being produced. Yeah, overall, very, very disappointing build quality. They're not super thin pages. They're just not the best quality. And so if this book gets a second printing, the build quality is absolutely something that needs to be addressed. Marvel cannot put out another printing of this book and have it be this bad. It just isn't acceptable. So I would advise that if you're not comfortable with repairing your own books, which is what I'll have to do with this one, I would suggest, if you're interested in this, wait for a reprint, and hopefully Marvel will have fixed the build quality by then. But to wrap up with some closing thoughts here, I had a really good time with this book overall, and it was especially entertaining reading this while watching the Born Again show due to how much inspiration there is for that show in here. Is it a good starting point for a new reader? I honestly think you could start here if you know the basics of Daredevil. You may not catch certain references to previous events here and there, but generally the book does a pretty good job of catching you up, and I don't think you'll be completely lost. Charles Soule does a lot in here to add his own spin on Daredevil, especially given his law experience that I mentioned. Now, I've been struggling lately to make time for reading, but with this book, I never felt like I needed a break from reading it. I would always want to read more and more whenever I had the time and, just find out where the story would go. And I definitely appreciated the return to darker storytelling. Mark Waid's run, while I enjoyed it, it didn't quite land for me in the same way that the other runs did, like Bendis and Brubaker and Miller. This felt like home again, so to speak, for the character. So if you enjoyed those runs that I mentioned, or even things like the Netflix show or Born Again, I think you'll enjoy this too. But that's been my review of the Daredevil by Charles Soule Omnibus, so you let me know what you thought about this book or the show Born Again. Let me know your thoughts down below. But thank you so much for joining me today, you guys. I hope to catch you in another video real soon, so you have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye-bye, guys.